Do not be afraid to ask questions. Do not be afraid to ask for help when you need it. I do that every day. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. It shows you have the courage to admit when you do not know something and to learn something new. Former President Barack Obama.
If asking for help feels like weakness to you, this episode might challenge your identity. Because most high achievers are not overwhelmed from lack of ability. They're overwhelmed by trying to do everything alone. But high achievers aren't the only ones who struggle to ask for help. Sometimes it's the student who doesn't want to be embarrassed. Sometimes it's the employee who feels like they're supposed to have it all together. Sometimes it's the person silently struggling with their mental health. And sometimes it's the person ashamed of their financial reality. In all of these cases, the silence costs more than the ask. We want to welcome you back to the Next Level You podcast, where we help you build the bridge between your now and your next. I'm your host, Myria Johnson.
And I'm Dr. Miriam Johnson, your co-host, co-visionary, and partner in these conversations about growth, alignment, and becoming.
We are continuing our A to Z journey, and today the letter is H. H is for help. And today we're talking about how to ask for help without seeing it as a weakness. Many high achievers don't avoid help because they lack discipline. They avoid help because they confuse independence with isolation. Independence says, I take responsibility for my life. Isolation says, I have to carry everything by myself. But this struggle isn't limited to high achievers. If you were praised for being capable, if you learned early that survival meant figuring it out on your own, if you were teased when you didn't understand something, and if strength became part of your identity, then asking for help doesn't feel strategic. Instead, it feels threatening. And sometimes it goes even deeper. Sometimes it's not just about being capable, it's about being perceived. If you already feel like people underestimate you, if you feel like your competence is quietly questioned, if you've ever felt like you have to work twice as hard to prove you belong, then asking for help doesn't just feel vulnerable, it feels dangerous. Because you're not just managing your identity, you're managing the narrative. And when there's already a stereotype in the air, lazy, incompetent, dependent, needy, then asking for help can feel like confirming something you've been trying to disprove your whole life. So you overperform, you overprepare, you overcarry, and you overextend. Not because you're incapable, but because you refuse to be misread. Social psychologists call this stereotype threat. When you're aware of a negative stereotype about your group, you often overcorrect to avoid confirming it. And overcorrection often looks like silence, and silence compounds cost. And what is the hidden cost? When you avoid help to protect your image, you end up carrying more than anyone sees. And the irony is this: the people who question your competence will question it anyway. Silence doesn't change perception, it just drains you. And carrying it alone doesn't make you stronger, it just makes you tired. And when your identity is built on capability or survival, help can feel like weakness, but it isn't.
There's a concept in social psychology that helps explain this image protection called social exchange theory. It suggests that we subconsciously evaluate the cost and reward of social interactions. Before asking for help, we run a quiet calculation. Will I look incompetent? Will this be awkward? Will I owe someone? Will they think less of me? If the perceived social cost outweighs the benefit, we stay silent. Not because we can't do it, but because we're protecting our image. And here's what we often miss. Research shows people consistently overestimate how negatively they will be judged for asking for help. We predict rejection, we anticipate embarrassment, but we rarely calculate the cost of not asking. Extended stress, delayed progress, burnout, missed opportunities. Protection feels safe in the moment, but protection is not the same as growth.
There was a season when I was overwhelmed but refused to ask for help because I didn't want to look like I couldn't manage it. At work, I felt like I was expected to carry the burden. There was responsibility, there were expectations, and there was a lot of pressure. And I internalized, if I ask for help, it means I can't handle this. So I told myself I just needed to push through. But pushing through cost me clarity, it cost me energy, and it cost me time. And honestly, when I really sit back and think about it, this didn't start at work. It started in school. I didn't ask for help when I was in school because I was already being teased. I wasn't one of the cool kids, and I didn't want to give anyone another reason to talk about me. So instead of raising my hand and asking for clarity, I stayed quiet, even when I didn't understand. And what that taught me early was this: it's safer to struggle silently than to risk public embarrassment. But I had a friend in high school who I deeply admired. She would raise her hand, she would ask questions, and she would clarify when she didn't understand something, even if our classmates laughed at her. But she didn't shrink. She kept asking, she kept clarifying, she kept showing up. And guess what? She ended up being our class valedictorian, not because she never needed help, but because she wasn't afraid to be vulnerable in the pursuit of growth. And that contrast has stayed with me. While I chose silence to protect my image, she chose vulnerability to improve her understanding. And long term, vulnerability won. But what's interesting is that I didn't stay there. When I got to college, something shifted. I realized very quickly that I was not going to survive, let alone succeed, if I stayed silent. The material was harder, the pace was faster, and no one was going to chase me down to make sure I understood. So, with the encouragement and support of my mother, I started going to office hours, even when it felt awkward. I went to tutoring, even when I felt like I should already understand. I asked questions after class. I formed study groups. And something changed, not just my grades, but my confidence. Because I realized that the students who were thriving weren't the ones who never struggled. They were the ones who asked early. They clarified often. They treated help like a tool, not a threat. And that shift helped me succeed. It helped me grow, and it helped me move from surviving academically to actually mastering the material. Asking didn't diminish me. It positioned me. This is how I was able to obtain my undergraduate degree in computer science. There were times when I wanted to quit and change my major, but help allowed me to persevere. I ended up graduating magna cum laude in a degree program that is often not pursued by people like me. Because I was vulnerable and asked for help, I achieved something I otherwise thought would be impossible.
Researcher and author Brené Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And asking for help requires all three of those conditions to be present. Uncertainty. You don't know how someone will respond. Risk. You might feel judged. Emotional exposure. You are admitting you don't have all the answers. But here's the paradox. Vulnerability feels like weakness in the moment, but it's the birthplace of growth. You cannot grow without exposing something that you don't know. And asking for help is simply naming what you don't know out loud. Help is not surrender. Help is a strategy. But strategy requires vulnerability. You cannot collaborate without revealing limits. You can't accelerate without admitting where you're stuck. And that's the tension, because vulnerability feels like exposure. But exposure is where growth begins.
I think that's what my friend understood before I did. She wasn't fearless. She was willing to be seen learning, willing to risk being laughed at, willing to prioritize progress over pride. And long term, that willingness compounded. Isolation protects your image, but vulnerability builds your capacity. And your next level will always require more capacity than the image. You don't reach your next level by proving you can survive alone. You reach it by being brave enough to be seen in the middle of the process. Here is your next check-in. Notice, where have you been struggling quietly? Is it mental, financial, academic, professional?
Evaluate. What story are you telling yourself about asking for help? Is it about weakness or is it about vulnerability? Are you protecting your image or postponing your growth?
Experiment. This week, make one clear, specific, time-bound request. Not a vague, "Can you help me?" but something direct. And when you ask, pay attention to what rises up internally. That discomfort, that's vulnerability. Stay with it.
Track. What actually happened? Were you judged or supported? Did asking reduce your credibility or increase your momentum? Growth requires visibility, and visibility requires courage.
Help begins with permission. Permission to be vulnerable before you are forced to be. Permission to admit what you don't know before it becomes a breaking point. Isolation protects your image, but vulnerability builds your capacity.
And your next level will always require more capacity than the image. In part 2, we will talk about what happens after you give yourself that permission, how to receive help, how to use it, and how support creates real movement. Until next time, keep building your bridge between your now and your next by asking for help when you need it.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Next Level You podcast on platforms such as YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music. Check our show notes for details. And if you want to dive deeper into the concepts we covered in this episode, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn by searching Next Level You. That's NEXTLEVEL and the letter U. Look for our bridge logo, and we'll see you soon.